1st of April 1909. I'm back at school, but I don't want to be here anymore. I keep thinking about my family, but I can never go back. I promised my mum she'd never see me again. I feel lost, rootless. I want to run away. Perhaps I should change my name, make my way to London, and join the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. I copied a newspaper article pinned to the bulletin board this evening. It reported that 12 female suffrage demonstrators were arrested outside the House of Commons yesterday. What it must feel like to be arrested. My English teacher, Mrs. Bertram, was not at all cross I had not written my essay for this afternoon's class. She is usually so strict, but all she says was, "The end of the week will be fine." Mrs. Partridge, our headmistress, must have told her about Lady Violet. 19th of April, 1909. I was searching through the Times in the library during break this morning when I spotted an article reporting that Mrs. Emmeline Pethwick Lawrence, the treasurer of the WSPU and a personal friend of Emmeline Pankhurst, was released from Holloway Prison 3 days ago after serving a 2-month sentence. 1,000 supporters were waiting at the gates to cheer her as she walked to freedom. What a splendid moment that must have been. How I would have loved to have been there. I was about to copy the details into my scrapbook when Miss Manners, the librarian, leaned over. "You have a visitor," she whispered. "Come with me." I was surprised because I'd not been expecting anyone. She led me to the waiting room that adjoined our headmistress' offices and instructed me to wait. About 5 minutes later, the door reopened and in walked Mrs. Partridge, followed by Lady Flora. I was amazed. "Stand up, please, Dolly," said Miss Partridge. "I want to introduce you to Lady Flora Bonington. She has travelled up from London to speak to you. I shall leave her with you. Remember to deport yourself in the manner of a young lady who is both educated and respectfully modest." I nodded, and with that we were left alone. I felt awkward and shy, yet thrilled to be standing there with Flora. She stepped forward and brushed her elegant fingers lightly against my cheek. "Do feel at ease, Dolly. There's no need for us to be formal with one another." She sat as she spoke and gestured for me to follow suit, which I did. Excuse me. "Do you have any idea why I'm here?" I panicked, tongue-tied. I had no notion of what she might have learned of me or what I expected to answer, so I made no response besides a shrug. "I think the name of my grandmother, Lady Violet Campbell, means something to you, does it not?" "But of course," I stammered. You were her ward, isn't that so?" "Yes, I was." I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. She was here to inform me that I must leave school. I would not have minded now Lady Violet was no longer in Gloucestershire, but where was I to go? "Mrs. Partridge tells me that my grandmother was the one who placed you at this school. She says that you are a very hard-working and gifted student and that you have ambitions to become a journalist. Is that true?" I nodded. "Splendid. I also gather that you're requesting 2 days' absence from school to attend Lady Violet's funeral. Were you there?" Again I nodded. "I'm so sorry I did not make myself known to you. I'm so sorry that you did not make yourself known to me or another member of the family." I wanted to, but I didn't feel it was correct to intrude. At this Flora smiled. "Forgive me for asking, Dolly, but are you an orphan?" "No, well, not exactly. My father died a few years ago, but my mother, as far as I know, is still living." My answer seemed to confuse her. She frowned, fathoming the puzzle. If I had a mother, why did I need a guardian? "This was among my grandmother's papers," she said. She fished into her velvet handbag and pulled out an official-looking document. is a letter handwritten by her mother to her solicitor, Mr. Makepeace, giving clear and precise instructions for your future. I felt my stomach tighten and the palms of my hands go sticky. My grandmother has set aside sufficient funds from her estate for your board and keep and for your education through to and including university, if that's where your ambitions lie. She mentions that her personal preference would be for you to attend St Hilda's College at Oxford, but she states that you must be free to choose and follow whatever path you believe is yours. She's also requested that the sum of £2,000 to be invested for you. You are to inherit this sum plus the monies that will have accrued on your 21st birthday. I was dumbfounded. I've never had one penny of my own, and the very idea that Lady Violet would think of me in her last moments left me speechless. More embarrassingly, it reduced me to tears. Sitting there just a few feet away from Flora, I bowed my head, desperate to hide the rush of tears rolling down my cheeks. I was crying for unexpected generosity shown to me by someone who had already been so kind to me, and because I lost her. In all these weeks since I've been told about her passing away, it was the first time I allowed my emotions to express themselves. I sniffed an apology for my foolishness and dug about in my pockets for a handkerchief. Flora offered me hers, a lacy one, and waited while I regained my composure. "May I ask how you first came to know my grandmother?" she eventually inquired, and with warmth she didn't seem to be the least bit put out that a healthy sum of what would have been her and her sister's inheritance had been willed to me. "She came to our cottage," I muttered. "My father was not there. He was out with my 4 brothers. They were marching with the strikers. Being a girl and the youngest, I was at home with mother." Excuse me. I cannot remember the exchange that took place between Lady Campbell and my mother during that first visit, though I stayed close to my mother's knee throughout the interview. I was only 5 at the time. What do I recall, though, is how she smelt. "Whatever do you mean by that?" exclaimed Flora. "She smelt so sweet, of eau de cologne, perfumes and scented waters that were quite unknown to me then. In our neighbourhood, other less pleasant odours were mingled and filled the air, but your grandmother did not seem to be disgusted or shocked." "Disgusted by what?" asked Flora. It was evident from her questions she'd never visited areas of London where the very poor live. "Well, her graceful manners and the finery of her clothes were quite at odds with the surroundings in which she found herself. She wore leather gloves and a hat decorated with glorious purple plumes, and she arrived in a motor car. It was driven by a man in goggles who stepped out to open the door for her and drew off the blanket that was covering her, a protection against the wind, I suppose. Her arrival remains vivid to me even to this day, because I'd never seen a motor car before. In the autumn and the air chilly, she bent to ask a group of children playing in the cobbled lane which cottage was ours. They stared, stupefied, and then I saw one of them point with filthy fingers towards our open door. Your grandmother thanked them with a bag of boiled sweets. Have you any idea what prompted her to pay you a visit?" I hesitated. I feared I might offend Flora. It seems that my mother had turned up unannounced and uninvited at your home in Cadogan Square, and had made a rumpus at the door. She can get very riled sometimes, and I remember that she was spoiling for a fight on that day. "Really? Why?" She had been determined to see Thomas Boddington, who, she was informed, was not at home. Whatever would she have wanted with my father? It was during the dockers' strike of 1900. We all had no money. My mother was angry, but more importantly, she was frightened and desperate, worrying how to feed us children and how to pay our rent. I don't know how your grandmother came to hear about my mother's visit to your house, but she did. She came, she said, because she was concerned for our welfare. She offered to help, but my mother sent her packing. Mother said we weren't in need of charity, and certainly not for a member of the Bonington family. As I recounted this incident of almost half a decade earlier, I caught my breath. Flora's father, who'd brought so much misery and hardship upon my family. Still, I never held Flora responsible about that, but she interrupted me. Baxter, of course, Dollie Baxter. How foolish of me not to have made the connection earlier. Your mother is Mrs. Baxter. Good Lord, yes. I remember her visit to our home very well indeed. I remember her too. And yes, your father is a docker employed by my father, and he's been dead these past 4 years. I'm sorry. Yes, you told me that. Please go on with your story and forgive my interruption. In spite of my mother's rejection, your grandmother came back to visit us from time to time over many years. She talked to my mother, asked her questions, and listened to what she had to say. It was suggested she would like to see me educated. I was the youngest and only daughter. I couldn't work on the docks. Lady Campbell painted a picture of a life for me that my mother could never have dreamed of. Think of it, Mrs. Baxter, she said. If Dolly could read and write, in due course own her own living, it would give her the opportunity to become an independent woman. What your grandmother was saying ran true, but my mother was defensive. She refused outright and with harsh words. We don't need your kind here, she declared. As far as I knew, she never discussed it with my father, and I'm not sure she really comprehended why your grandmother would want to waste her resources on a family like ours. Working class, that's what we are, Dolly. The bottom of the heap, she used to say to me, derided by the rest of society. But at some point she began to trust Lady Campbell, and little by little she came round to the idea. And there's precious little furniture to offer you elsewhere, she'd mutter. It was though she was trying to convince herself that she was making the right decision. But it wasn't till I turned 10, a short while after the death of my father, that my mother finally made up her mind. One morning, full of resolution, "Come along, miss," she announced. We walked for miles, looking out for a place where she could telephone to ask Lady Campbell to drop by. When your grandmother arrived a few days later, my mother explained her predicament. But she had recently lost her husband and was penniless save for her 2 sons, brought home by my other brothers, had married and left by then. She feared ending her days in the poorhouse and had come to realise there was an opportunity for me to have a better life. "I'm doing this for you, Dolly," she said the evening before I was due to leave. "I want you to have a future. God knows I don't want you to end up like me." The following morning we said our goodbyes. I watched her struggling with her emotions and hugged her so tight. "I'll come back soon," I whispered, choked with my own. "No, you won't," she barked. "Forget me. Forget all this. I don't want to see your face here again. Promise me you'll never return." "But—" "Promise, Dolly." I nodded, failing hopelessly to fight off tears. "What happened then?" asked Flora. "I was driven in a chauffeured motor car to Paddington Station, given a ticket and put on a train to Gloucestershire. It was the first time I'd ever ridden on a train. I headed for your grandmother's estate. When we arrived at the country station where I'd been instructed to get off, a porter met me. I remember how puzzled he was. I had no luggage, no belongings of any sort. He hailed down a horse-drawn cab, and within the hour I was with your grandmother." "How absolutely extraordinary. She never mentioned a word of you or any of this story to me," mused Flora. "I've often wondered why she bothered with me, but on few occasions, when I begged her to tell me, she fobbed me off without giving me a satisfactory explanation." "I think I might know the answer," said Flora. "Really? What is it?" "Let's leave it for another day, but I will tell you when the time is right. Meanwhile, Please tell me all about your life at this famous school. Are you happy here? I am very fortunate, though I'm a bit of a square peg in a round hole. I don't follow. I'm the only girl of working class origins here. Ah, I see. Yes, that could be difficult. How long have you been here? 2 years. Before that, while I was living at your grandmother's, I was tutored by a governess. Excuse me. I couldn't read or write when I left home. There was a lot to learn. I had to work very hard. Then I attended a school in one of the neighbouring country towns for a short while, and only later, when it was agreed that I'd be able to keep up, I was enrolled here. But then, in answer to your question, yes, I was very happy here until Lady Campbell died. But now I feel... what? Cut off, alone. For the first time since I arrived in Gloucestershire, I'm really homesick. I long to return to the city. Flora rose, took me in her arms and embraced me like a sister. You are never again to consider yourself alone. I'm certain, Dolly, that you and I will become the best of friends. My grandmother's wish is that I replace her as your guardian, on a temporary basis at least, until you and your circumstances choose us another direction. What do you say to that? I realise that we are yet barely acquainted, but I would like you to think of me as a sister, or if you feel that I'm too old for such a role, how about a kindly aunt? Sisters, I exclaimed. Oh, yes, please. And how would you like to come and stay with me for a few days at my house in London? We would organise it for May. I was overwhelmed. Such generous offer was unexpected. What do you say, Dolly? I would love it, I answered shyly. Then it's settled. I shall speak to Mrs. Partridge and arrange everything. Thank you so much. We said our goodbyes and I hurried back to the library, where I'd left my books. I was horribly late for maths, but I didn't care. I could hardly believe my good fortune, and it was as though all this had been longing for was suddenly being offered to me.